In my never-ending quest to create a wardrobe that clothes me in happiness and wonder, approximately 1 year ago I made this beautiful shirt, based on a popular style from the Victorian era. This style was called the Garibaldi shirt, popular in the 1860s due to the rise of Giuseppe Garibaldi, a figurehead in the unification of Italy. The style is similar to an Italian men's shirt, but much fuller and with sloping shoulders, showing the typical Victorian tendency to romanticize. A year later, today, as I explore more and more decades in my wardrobe construction, I thought it was time for a new Garibaldi shirt, where I fixed some of the mistakes of the previous one. I acquired 3 yards of this stunning golden yellow linen and dug out my truly Victorian pattern. The first step was to cut out my pattern pieces. At this point, the Victorian in me started to struggle. If I were to cut these pattern pieces out in our modern way, with the fabric on the fold along the grain line, I would be wasting so much fabric, as my linen is unusually wide. I decided to make a new fold and cut my pieces on the cross grain. The cross grain is the horizontal direction of the fabric, or weftwise, as opposed to the vertical, which is called the grain, true grain, or following the warp threads, and runs along the selvedge. This may not help you in every project, and definitely be careful if it's a very fitted garment, but if you do want to scrape and save fabric that you have grown emotionally attached to, even though it's just fabric, then try some creative cutting. I got all of my pieces cut, and I managed to still have just under 1.5 meters left, with all of these little pieces of cabbage. My brain immediately starts turning. Can I make a skirt out of 1.5 meters? Maybe? We'll come back to that. The shirt construction itself is very easy, so I would recommend this as a beginner project if you're looking for an easy sewing with high reward. The first step is to prepare the center fronts for the bottom plackets by turning them under and top stitching. I do this with my iron. Then, if you are ready to commit, you may venture to do buttonholes at this point, as it is easier to maneuver the pieces under the machine before they are sewn together. There was a moment when I contemplated sewing the buttonholes by hand, but then it wouldn't be a quick project anymore, would it? So a modern machine it is. Then you can sew all of the 4 seams. Yeah, that's it. The seam finishes are up to you, but I would recommend finishing the seams to get a longer lasting garment. I did mine using French seams, which worked well for this weight of linen, and it's a fairly simple technique once you've tried it a few times. However, as I took my pin seams to the machine, I discovered a problem. The machine would not sew. I spent a few hours trying to solve the problem, but alas, it was beyond me. So I decided to bring in the cavalry. This vintage Singer sewing machine is actually the first and only vintage sewing machine I have bought. The other was a gift. I had never gotten around to setting it up and playing with it, but you may have seen it in the background of, well, nearly all of my videos. She finally gets to shine. With a basic cleaning routine, she was ready for battle. I soon discovered the real battle was actually with my arm. This is a hand-turn machine only, but this was still faster than hand sewing and actually quite calming. After the main seams, the neckline is bound with a strip of fabric cut on the bias. I did choose to hand sew the inside down, but please remember anything I do by hand here can be done by machine, which is much easier and much faster. The next step is to tackle the sleeves. The side seams are sewn with French seams, as before. These sleeves are big. If you'd like a less dramatic look, you can always make them less wide by folding the pattern. Now, for reasons unbeknownst to myself and probably all of you, I decided to hand gather the cuffs and sleeve tops. I did one tiny row of running stitches at the bottom of the cuff and at the top of the sleeve. The thread is then pulled to gather up the fabric and pinned to the cuff. The cuffs are sewn by machine, folded in half, then the raw edge inside is turned under and sewn down by hand. The sleeves are attached by machine. To finish this tricky seam, I simply bound it in this thin twill tape. The hem is narrow as I wanted this to be a long top, and it's tucked in anyway, so the raw edge is turned under twice and sewn down by machine. In this strange angle, I am sewing down these wooden buttons, and with the buttons on, the shirt is complete. Thus, we may proceed to the unplanned portion of the project and video. A skirt? My first step was to measure my leftover fabric and figure out if a skirt would actually work. My main issue was the length, for I do not wear skirts that are on the knee or above as a personal preference. A circle skirt would be the most efficient use of the small amount of fabric while creating a large hem. We need the swish. I decided to give it a shot. For thorough circle skirt instructions, I'll link a different video here. First, you draw in your waist radius and don't forget to add seam allowance. Then you must set out your length, in my case as much as I could squeeze out. The main part of the skirt must hang overnight for the fabric to stretch on the bias. You can then trim it back into position. Meanwhile, I cut and assembled all the other elements of the skirt, which included a pocket, a waistband, a skirt placket, and a flounce. Everything, and I mean everything, is pieced. The flounce is just seam after seam after seam. But the flounce will add a couple of inches in length, which will make it more comfortable for me to wear, and therefore, worth it. The first thing I do is slice up the skirt to make a back seam, and I add a skirt placket. I also have a video explaining skirt plackets, which I'll link here. Now, you may be thinking, circle skirts don't seem very Victorian. You are correct. In this time period, gored skirts were the popular item. However, I did not have enough fabric for this, but I did remember advice I saw in Harper's Bazaar. In 1868, the editor of the Answers to Correspondence advises, shape the poplin skirt in the side seams to imitate gores. I do believe I will. With the skirt inside out and on the stand, I make essentially tucks on either side of the center front and at the side seams. Each is 1/4 of an inch wide, taking up a total of 1/2 an inch per tuck. I had added an allowance for this when calculating the waist radius. One of the side tucks will also conveniently hold our pocket. Once they are marked, where they fall nicely, they are sewn by machine and ironed. To finish the flounce, I dyed some linen tape to match. My goal was to keep as much length on the flounce and the overall skirt as possible, so I turned under 1/4 of an inch of the flounce and pinned the tape over it. It is sewn by machine across the folded edge. The hem was very long, but that extra 1/4 of an inch was worth it, right? Right? The top edge is secured with a discreet herringbone stitch. The flounce is attached to the skirt with a very narrow French seam, again to keep length. I added 2 buttons and button loops to the waistband, and snaps to the placket, and the skirt was finished. I love this project. I think it turned super cute and extraordinarily crafty to get 2 items out of fabric that was intended for one. My obsession with linen and mustard yellow continues. By making them 2 separate pieces instead of one dress, I can also wear them into lots of different styles. I've tried a couple of them. Let me know your favorite in the comments. A big thank you to my top tier patrons, Alexa, Angela, Erin, Lane, Lauren, Luge, Margaret and Rhonda. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in our next adventure.